And we are live. Thank you, everyone, for joining. Here with Congressman Jake Auchincloss, and we have a lot to talk about this morning. Obviously, all eyes are on the vote-a-rama going on in the Senate, and Representative Auchincloss was on the House side of that when that was going on. And there was a development this morning that you posted about on your Substack, Simple But Not Easy, the Republicans abandoning the part of the bill that was in the House about artificial intelligence. You were very active in that. So if we could just start things off with there, tell us a little bit about the background of that and what just happened.
Adam, good morning. Thanks for having me on. Please call me Jake, and I'm looking forward to this conversation. The Republicans are about to vote to take away health insurance for 10 million Americans and to raise health insurance premiums for tens of millions more. They're going to hobble our clean energy industry. They're going to cut taxes for people who don't need tax cuts. And the reason I raise all this when you ask me about AI is, despite voting for all that horrible legislation, they actually revolted against this AI legislation, which just goes to show you how bad that AI measure from Ted Cruz was. What it did was it tried to install a 10-year moratorium on any state legislating on AI. Now, put aside the fact that that's a very sloppily drafted conception anyway. I mean, it's like regulating electricity or regulating C++. It's a general purpose technology underlying a lot of different products and services, so it's hard to regulate that, period. But it basically would have guaranteed that for the next decade, no laws were passed in America on AI, period, because the tech companies would block it at the state level through litigation based on this moratorium, and Republicans would block it in Congress based on the filibuster because they don't want to touch the tech companies. That was such a bad idea that even Republicans revolted against it in the last measure. So what should Democrats do? Clearly doing nothing is not an option, but overregulating is not advised either, particularly with the fast-moving technology. My argument is we need to focus on the area where the impacts of AI will be most immediate and where they are clearly harmful, and that is social media. These social media corporations have become the wealthiest, most powerful platforms in the history of the world by monetizing the attention span of our kids, turning them into products to be sold off to the highest digital bidder. And now Mark Zuckerberg is talking about AI chatbots meant to replace kids' real world friends. Adam, I got three little kids, 5, 3, and 2. I don't want Mark Zuckerberg to design AI friends for my kids. I want my kids to have real friends. It's like this guy's like a cartoon villain in what he's describing here. And TikTok and Twitch and Reddit, and they're all aiming in this direction. We have to peel the bark off these social media platforms, revoke their special privileges under Section 230, raise the age of internet adulthood, tax their digital advertising revenue. Happy to go into detail about these, but this is where Democrats have to strike hard.
Well, you just said you're happy to go into detail about it. Expand on that. What are the solutions for that now that this ban on AI regulation that's part of the bill seems to be off the table? What's next?
What should be next is really three things I think are the highest impact. Section 230, raising the age of internet adulthood and taxing their digital revenue. Section 230, Adam, you're a lawyer, you know this, was passed in the 1990s, and it basically gave the social media platforms immunity from prosecution for any torts that user-generated content create on their platform. So somebody posts toxic or defamatory or libelous material, they can't be sued for it. Now, in the 1990s, when it was a bunch of like people posting recipe blogs, fine, that made sense. It doesn't make sense anymore. We are now granting Zuckerberg and TikTok immunity from the same rules that broadcasters and journalists have to follow, which is to say, you have to be subject to 1,000 years of tort law. You can't just defame people. You can't post intimate privacy violations that are, deep fake pornography of women, for example. We have to make it a board level problem for these corporations. Otherwise, they're going to continue to corrode our civil discourse. It's very, very hard to revoke Section 230. They've built up an enormously powerful lobby that claims that basically if you revoke Section 230, it's the end of free speech, which is curious to me because it wasn't drafted by James Madison in the 1790s. It was drafted by a couple of senators in the 1990s. So the First Amendment's fine. It's doing well. It's got very strong legal protections around it. There's nothing in the First Amendment that says that freedom of speech equals freedom of reach, that everything you post should be allowed to be amplified algorithmically. Um, we also need to raise the age of internet adulthood. Right now, it's 13 and not enforced. So that means, just to be clear, that 10, 11, 12-year-olds are freely signing terms and conditions and contracts with these social media platforms, whose entire business model is geared towards keeping these kids endlessly scrolling so that they can monetize their screen time. And parents are powerless to fight back. I'm no better, candidly. I bought a book a couple months ago called How to Break Up with Your Phone in 30 Days, and I'm still on day one. It's pathetic. But it's we're in this surround sound of the digital empires, and individual parents don't have the wherewithal to do it. It's a collective action problem that requires Congress to act. Raise that age to at least 16, ideally 18. Australia is doing this. France is doing this. We got to protect kids in the world of bits, just like we do in the world of atoms. Um,
Mm.
and then finally, we can talk about taxation, but I want to make sure you get weigh in here.
Well, we have a lot to touch upon, so I do want to get back to some of what you said if we have the time. But the Senate vote-a-rama, I want to go back to that. What have you been hearing from folks on the Senate side about the prospects of this passing? It's obviously in its third day, and there's been back and forth. Where do things stand right now?
I don't pay attention to the chatter. And the reason I don't pay attention to the chatter is because I've been in Congress for 5 years, which is, 5 years enough time to know that Republicans, they huff and they puff, and then Donald Trump blows their house down. These guys all fold. They fold like a cheap suit. I just know that they're going to do it. So the
Right.
Senate's going to pass this bill. They're going to, have put on their serious faces and be like, "Well, I have serious concerns about this or that measure, but I'm going to vote for it because they're going to promise me this or that." Like, no, you're not. Donald Trump just put on, John Thune put Donald Trump on speakerphone. He yelled at you and you crumbled. And the same thing's going to happen in the House, by the way. It's going to go to the House. All of these serious sounding Freedom Caucus people are going to be like, "Well, this isn't what we voted for, and the debt, and blah, blah, blah." And they're like, "Okay, guys, yeah, you hold your press conference and you're going to fold."
So it seems like these smaller fights, then, especially like the ones over AI and whatnot, are very important because how they fold matters, right? So, in what form, what should folks look for? Because right now, people are calling their representatives. They are voicing their concerns about parts of the bill that are intolerable to them. What are the fights to pay attention to once this, as you say, inevitably comes back to the House?
The AI was an important one, but there's not much that can salvage this bill. I mean, you can beat around the edges of the Medicaid FMAP rates, for example, but the problem with this bill is the core of this bill is a wealth transfer from the poorest quintile of Americans to the upper decile of Americans. It is, there have been tax cut bills in the past that have cut taxes across the board in ways that disproportionately helps the rich, but gave everyone a tax cut and expanded the debt. So George Bush did this. This bill is unique in that it is a tax cut for the wealthiest, and then it's an entitlements cut for the poor. So that is a literal wealth transfer at a time of skyrocketing income inequality, a literal wealth transfer from the poor to the rich. It's going to explode the debt by at least $4 trillion. It's going to cut health care for Americans who most need it. And it's going to give tax cuts to people who weren't even asking for tax cuts. I mean, this is the thing, Adam. I actually, the district I represent is really two different districts. I've got the inner suburbs of Boston, affluent, progressive, and I've got the working class cities and towns on the border of Rhode Island that in a lot of ways look a lot like the post-industrial heartland of America and Michigan and elsewhere. And economically, this bill, I haven't dug into the final numbers yet, but it probably actually would help the affluent suburbs inside of Boston because of the way it hooks up the top 10%. None of my constituents are asking for they're not they weren't looking for this. This isn't they've been doing pretty well. And what they want to see is the rule of law. They want to see a government that can steward this economy and fiscal responsibility into the 2030s. They weren't seeking $700,000 in annual revenue for the top 1% of earners in this country, which is what this bill broadly is going to do. Meanwhile, the working class cities and towns that I represent on the border of Rhode Island, they're going to get gut punched by these Medicaid cuts. And also some of the industries that we're promising for reindustrialization, clean energy, medical devices, are also going to take a punch.
Right. And late last night, there were proposed amendments from Democratic senators trying to impose small taxes on people, not just billionaires, people earning $1 billion, making more than $1 billion in income. The Republicans voted that down. So, one question, part of All Rise News' editorial mission is we focus on civic engagement. And every week we take a look at um, whatever numbers we can gather about people calling their representatives. And unsurprisingly, the most popular topic from an app called Five Calls that people use to call their elected officials last week was the budget bill. And that was all over the country and in Massachusetts. Have you been getting calls from your constituents about the budget bills? What are they talking about?
Medicaid. This bill is going to be known for its Medicaid cuts. Uh, I welcome the calls from my constituents. I think it's valuable for me to hear from them, and we have a kaleidoscopic way of engaging with my district where it's online, it's in person, it's visiting business owners, it's visiting social service providers. So I love all of it. I'm convinced they don't have to. They don't have to twist my arm. I'm not here to cut Medicaid. It's not what I signed up for in public service. The challenge for Democrats, though, is it's not enough for us to come back out swinging and say, "Hey, we're here to defend the status quo of healthcare," because people don't like the status quo of healthcare, right? Healthcare costs are rising twice as fast as wages in this country. So the message of, "Hey, we're going to restore the FMAP rate or we're going to restore the ACA premium tax credit," people they don't have a primary care physician. They can't afford their deductibles, right? So we have to think very boldly. And I actually think the Republicans, there's a political jujitsu opportunity. Jujitsu, as you know, Adam, is where you use your opponent's momentum to their detriment by flipping the maneuver. They're coming after Medicaid. I think we say, okay, you want to come after Medicaid? We're going to show you that Americans love Medicaid, and actually Medicaid expansion, that using Medicaid as the basis for automatic universal medical insurance at the state level is in fact the path forward. And my home state, Massachusetts, through its Medicaid waiver, has really been pioneering this. Mass Health, which is Massachusetts Medicaid, has been using accountable care organizations where payers and providers are working in conjunction to really deliver quite high quality care at affordable rates for mass health beneficiaries. I think what we should be doing next is saying, let's give that to everybody in Massachusetts. Let's make that the basis, right? And people can still buy supplemental if they want to, but let's make that the basis so that just by being in the Massachusetts, that just by being a citizen in Massachusetts, you are automatically enrolled in that care. Like that's where Democrats need to go next, is actually lean into Medicaid because it's popular and it works.
Mm. When I spoke to Senator Sheldon Whitehouse some time ago, one of the things that he recommended in terms of civic engagement is yes, of course, call your reps, but call your friends in more conservative areas and tell them to call their reps. What's your recommendation for folks? Obviously, you spoke to the seeming futility, the Senate's going to fold, and it's going to get passed in the House. But for folks who really are concerned about getting knocked off their Medicaid, getting knocked off their insurance, and having this enormous wealth transfer that you describe. What can folks do right now?
Three things. So first, yes to what Sheldon said. So in particular, if you're interested in healthcare issues, I would encourage Bill Cassidy's office in Louisiana, Crapo's office in Idaho, and Brett Guthrie's office in Kentucky. Those three have a tremendous amount of influence on healthcare policy given their positions in Congress. We need them weighing in, not just on Medicaid, but on vaccines. RFK is trying to bring measles back, on the NIH and depoliticizing biomedical research, and also the regulatory process around biopharma. So we need all of that engagement. Number two, don't only focus on politicians, focus on issues. Find one issue that galvanizes you. Maybe it's gun safety, maybe it's reproductive rights, maybe it's climate action, maybe it's rule of law. And then find an organization that aligns with that issue. Protect Democracy or Environmental Voter Project or the Everytown Coalition for Gun Safety. And then stick with that one organization, because what these orgs do is they keep the envelope of civil society expanded so that this authoritarian overreach that we're seeing, it doesn't have enough political oxygen, because on every point they're being contested. And it does work. I reject the nihilistic, self-defeating view that we can't fight back against Trump. It's not true. We've had a lot of successes. We got to keep it up. Politicians in Congress, particularly the Republicans, are basically worthless on this front, but these civil society orgs really do matter. And of course, we got to build that into a midterm success. Final thing I'll say, Adam, on this front, electoral reform. If you're frustrated that Republicans won't stand up to Trump, or for that matter, if you wish Democrats would stand up more to our own party, we got to get rid of the primary system. The primary system has basically destroyed American politics since 1968. It pulls the parties to their flanks. It's centrifugal. And when you combine that with gerrymandering, what you get is out of the 435 members of Congress, 400 of them are oriented towards their primary, not towards their general.
Mm.
So you're seeing states like Alaska and California have already moved away from this. Massachusetts may come next. We should be pushing there.
You mentioned RFK Jr., very close to your district in federal court in Boston. There was recently a federal judge, Judge William Young, a Reagan appointee, had issued a ruling calling the RFK's NIH that under his supervision said that it was responsible for the worst instance of racial discrimination that he's seen in his 4-decade career. I know that you've been holding RFK Jr.'s feet to the fire in a different aspect. You're talking about his conflicts of interest in running the agency. Can you go into that?
RFK Jr. is maybe the worst cabinet secretary in modern American history. His conspiracy and quackery is really astounding. Uh, the the assault that he is levying against evidence-driven policy and against vaccines in particular is going to lead to more contagious disease in the United States. For example, measles requires 95% population vaccination to get herd immunity and prevent measles outbreaks. And so when you lower that, whether through social media or through the organs of state, like he's doing at HHS, you're going to make regions more vulnerable to measles outbreaks. Same thing with bacterial meningitis, or same thing with polio, God help us, which is going to happen overseas now. Probably 100,000 kids will get polio this year overseas because of the dismantlement of USAID, which RFK has supported. So we got to battle on those fronts. The area where I think he's most vulnerable in the immediate term is just how corrupt he is. He has this morally self-righteous view that everyone around him is corrupt, and he is this, oracle of self-righteous wisdom. In fact, all of his lieutenants are conflicted, right? The leader of healthcare for Doge runs a company on the side that has all the Medicare Advantage health insurance companies investing in him while he's setting their regulations and reimbursement rates. RFK's top aide, Callie Means, runs a business on this side that's going to get more revenue from changes they're making to health savings accounts. These people are all kind of they're shelling supplements and other unregulated health and wellness goods, and they're hooking up their own companies and their own investors, and they're doing it out of the public purse. And RFK needs to be called to the mat for it.
Mm. And so how else? I mean, obviously you questioned him during congressional hearings. What more should elected officials be doing? Should the public be doing to call attention to those conflicts of interest?
I need bipartisan support for this. Now, if Democrats take back the House, I'm collecting the receipts, I'm preparing the investigation, we can get a lot more muscular. But in the minority, I need Republicans to join me. I walked across the aisle and before I sent these letters of inquiry to RFK's top staffers, and I gave the chairman of the health committee, who's a Republican, a chance to join me. And I said, listen, it doesn't need to be partisan, and I'll work with you on the language. And it's not about who he works for, it's just about what he's doing. Wouldn't join me. So I need sustained pressure, right? Georgia and Kentucky, for my purposes, Buddy Carter and Brett Guthrie, I need those two to take seriously their oversight responsibility. And it didn't used to be this way where Congress only cared about oversight when it was the other party in power, right? In the 1990s and early 2000s, Democratic heads of the committees, they used to challenge the Clinton administration on this stuff. So it doesn't have to be this thing where you only do oversight if the other party's in power. No, we're Congress. We're a co-equal branch of government. Our constituents expect us to keep a weather eye on conflicts of interest.
Mm. Turning to the Trump's use of the military and on civilian streets, you're a Marine Corps major. Give me your reaction when you saw that he was sending the Marines to the streets of Los Angeles?
Deeply unfair to these kids. And I say kids deliberately. There's 700 Marines deployed. Something like probably 500 to 550 of them are under the age of 25 years old. These are young people, right? They enlisted at 18, 19, 20 years old. And they enlisted because they wanted to sweat and bleed in defense of their country. They love the United States. They love the Marine Corps. And they wanted to be Marines to fight for the country and the ideals that it represents. And instead, they're being used as political props for a president who's worried about his approval ratings and wants to distract the country's attention. There's no rebellion in Los Angeles. To the extent that there's civil disorder, which there was, that should be prosecuted. You're not allowed to, burn cars or destroy private property or attack personnel. The LAPD has it in hand. If they didn't have it in hand, they could have called the National Guard and the Governor Newsom could have deployed it. You know this better than me, Adam. There's a very well established mechanism by which law enforcement can ladder up escalation if necessary. The LAPD police chief said, I don't need the Marines. I don't even know what I'm going to do with them. They represent a logistical and operational challenge. So clearly the president was doing this for political, not for security reasons. And it's in violation of posse comitatus, which is the principle that you don't deploy the military for law enforcement. I think it's unfair to these Marines because their camaraderie and their esprit de corps is being channeled towards political ends when it shouldn't be. These guys are training to fight the People's Liberation Army, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. They're not training to do crowd control in LA. That's not the tactics and techniques that they've been practicing. And I know that because I was a Marine infantry officer in 29 Palms. I know how they train. They train to locate, close with, and destroy the enemy. They don't train to, handcuff somebody who's being unruly.
Mm. But now, after the Ninth Circuit ruling, we have this precedent showing that Trump has very broad authority, not unlimited authority like he hoped, but some broad authority. So, what are we left with here? How
Yeah.
does Congress respond in terms of maybe clarifying the law? One of the things that the Ninth Circuit found is that uh, going through the governor doesn't even mean giving the governor a heads up. If the Democrats retake Congress, can that be addressed to rein in some of those broad powers to send the Marines onto civilian streets?
This was exactly my concern with litigation, actually. It's not that I disagree with Newsom litigating it. It's just that the laws are so broadly and poorly drafted that even a liberal minded judge may actually rule that the president does, in fact, have this authority. I was very concerned about this outcome. The short answer is, and Adam, I'm sure you have thoughts about this too, is we've got to revise both the Insurrection Act and the Posse Comitatus Act, these two 19th century laws that are broadly well intentioned, but just have way too many lacuna in them, too many loopholes to be filled. And we got to basically make clear that there's really only two reasons a president can deploy the military for law enforcement purposes, certainly without an assent from a governor. One, an actual insurrection, like the Civil War. And I will note that when we had an insurrection on the Capitol on January 6th, President Trump refused to deploy the National Guard. So it's not like this guy takes seriously the actual rebellion clause. And then number two is if a class of Americans is being systemically deprived of their constitutional rights. And think like school desegregation in the Deep South during the 1960s. I mean, these are really the only two scenarios where you can see posse comitatus being circumvented. And we have to write the laws to make that more clear. And it's going to be part of, I think, a broader mission over the next decade to rein in this imperial presidency. It's not just war powers and law enforcement powers that have gone out of control. It's tariff and sanction authority. It's control of the president over due process. It's control over the president over empowerment and spending. Americans are exhausted. Every 4 years, it's like we're electing a king. It's just enough. The president should take care that the laws are upheld, not be an emperor for the next 4 years.
Mm. Uh, Obviously, the protests in LA have been largely driven from reaction to immigration enforcement. The right now in LA and nationwide, we have ICE personnel wearing face masks, disguising their identities. I know that you in Massachusetts joined delegation with Senator Elizabeth Warren in talking about overreach of ICE. Can you go into that and what the Democrats should do and lawmakers should do in general that law enforcement identify themselves?
Yeah, so Americans, even Americans who are hawkish on immigration and want to see more deportations of undocumented immigrants, do not recognize a country in which an unmarked van with masked officers pulls up next to a young woman walking to class. That's happened in my state. And she can't tell if she's being kidnapped or detained. Or they're not signing up for a system in which an 18-year-old carpooling to volleyball practice with his friends, an honors student, a member of the class band, been in this country since kindergarten, no criminal record. He's spent to sit for 6 days to sleep in a concrete cell with no windows and one toilet for 35 grown men. Americans didn't sign up for this. This is not what Americans are seeking. Americans are upset with the Democratic Party for the handling of border security under Joe Biden, and rightfully so. Allowing 5 million undocumented individuals to cross the southern border with no plan was not appropriate. And we do have to own that. And I would just say that it's not that long ago that we had Barack Obama, who in fact made it a priority to deport individuals who were a threat to public safety. We should 100% be doing that. You're here without documentation, and you got domestic violence infractions, you've got felony DUI infractions, you are, open air drug use. Like, you're out of here. I think Americans are broadly there on that issue, but don't go to schools or Home Depot lots where individuals are looking for work, right? Like, that's not prioritization. Prioritize the people who are a threat to public safety.
Right. And I think one of the cases that you just mentioned obliquely was the case of Hermesa Ozturk, who you disagree with politically, but you believe in her constitutional rights to say what she has to say without masked ICE personnel grabbing her in the middle of the street and sending her to Louisiana. Is that a fair summary of your position on?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, she wrote an op-ed. I think it was a bad op-ed. I've written many of op-eds that disagree with her, and that's the way America works. The way America does not work is, to your point, you write something that the powers that be don't like, and you get pulled off the street. Now, this is another example where Congress has some work to do on the laws themselves, because when you dig into the Immigration and Naturalization Act of 1953, what you find is it's way too broadly written. The Secretary of State actually basically can sort of create out of thin air these concerns about, I think, misalignment with U.S. foreign policy is the actual verbiage that that allows him to revoke not just student visas, but actually green cards, Adam. Like, that's too. We clearly need to create some principles about what it actually means. I don't have an issue with, as part of the visa allotment, looking at people's general disposition towards the United States. I think that can be one of the criteria. I have a real problem with people who are here with visas then now being harried or hassled because of their political speech.
Mm. I want to turn back to something you said a little bit earlier with Section 230
Yeah.
of the Communication Decency Act. Folks who defend Section 230, and one of the big concerns about Section 230 reform is what happens. I see, we have commentators on this chat. If someone writes something that someone perceives to be defamatory, that the person holding the chat could be sued. How can Congress uphold the kind of free speech concerns in terms of in pushing those reforms? Make sure that folks who run a Substack won't be held personally liable for something that their users say.
Yeah, so I actually drafted a bill to do this. So it's not academic to me. We actually put this in black and white text. The short answer is, you're a Substack writer or host like you or I. Basically, we don't revoke Section 230 is the short answer. There needs to be immunization from litigation for basic third-party user-generated content. That principle is a pretty good principle. Where I tip the scales is when you become a mega platform. I think it was more than $500 million in revenue, but I'd have to double check. Where what we do is we establish a duty of care. It does not mean that Facebook, which has 3 billion users, every time someone posts something that's toxic, they get sued. No. What it means is that Facebook has to establish a duty of care, basic standards, a process for taking down content that they believe is tortious, a process for storing the content so that individuals can have it for litigation purposes after the fact. And that what we are doing is we are applying the tort law that has been accreted over the last 1,000 years to these social media platforms. And the social media platforms, what they'll say is, listen, Jake, the world's very complicated. Please, like, if you do this, if you open this up, it'll be one never-ending stream of lawsuits. And my point of view is, actually, the reason common law works so well is because what we have done is we have taken each individual edge case. We have allowed a jury of 12 people to use common sense on that particular case. And over time, each of those rulings has developed a meaning for what is defamation, what is libel, what is sedition, what is an intimate privacy violation, right? And you're the lawyer, not me. Overall, I think that's worked pretty well because it's a very tightly scoped definition of what harms are that's gradated towards different types of people. I'm a public persona. People can say a lot of things about me and I can't sue because I'm a public persona, and that's fair. You're a private individual, you're a kid especially, much different standard, right? These social media platforms should not be immune from the last 1,000 years of common law. They have to wrestle with these problems just like broadcasters and journalists and other new forms of media had to in the last 200 years.
Mm. Thank you so much, Jake. And just quick correction, it's a common misunderstanding. I'm actually not an attorney, but I've been a legal journalist for 20 years.
I
And
apologize. Okay,
no,
sorry,
no
Paul.
worries, no worries. It's one of those things that you learn a language by
Yeah.
through immersion, and I've learned the language of the courts by being in courts covering the cases for nearly 2 decades. Thank you so much, Jake, for all of your time. I look forward to hopefully doing this again and discussing even more topics that when that are on folks' mind. So thank you again. Hope to do this again soon.
Hey, Adam, thanks for having me on. Take care.
You
Happy
too.
4th,
Bye bye.
everybody.
Happy 4th.